Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Leaders Edge Season 4, Episode 10, with our very special guest, Mr. Hector Hernandez. But before we begin, we encourage all of you to please click on the like and the subscribe button. Competency development, building and design, human capital management, and high-performing work systems is a desirable standard to transform an average corporation into a world-class business organization. Competency modeling, that is our topic for today. Allow me to introduce our special guest. With over 30 years of HR management and OD training practice, Hector had been personally involved in many corporate undertakings, both in profit and nonprofit organizations, also both locally and internationally. He started work as a junior training assistant at Ayala Life right after graduation from the university, then became manager of the training department. Then after Ayala Life, he joined Glaxo Philippines as training and OD manager, moved to American Express as HR director. And this is where he became involved in course design of competency-based new programs. He then moved to Novartis Philippines as country HR director and helped the Asia Pacific Australia region again to implement the Competency Initiative. He was trained under the McKinsey competency model of Basel Switzerland. And after his 5-year international stint as global HR head in South Asia in 2013, he gained further HR and OD experiences with his stint as FVP of HR and OD at MediaQuest Holdings Incorporated, and that is TV5, Signal TV, Digital 5, and MediaQuest itself. And later on, he moved as VP for HR and OD at MaxiCare Healthcare Corporation. He is currently a professorial lecturer at the University of Asia and Pacific with specialization covering competency development building, human capital management, and high-performing work systems. And in 2021, he was appointed as head of Advanced Competency Development Center, Inc., or ACCI, based in BGC Taguig. Our resource person graduated double degree of AB Behavioral Science, Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the De La Salle University, and then he pursued his law degree at the Ateneo de Manila Law School and passed the bar in 1985. And in 2019, he was awarded a diplomate in people management by the Society of Fellows in People Management Association of the Philippines. With regard to his personal life, he has 5 children, and what he likes to do is to travel with his wife and, of course, his children. Friends, let us welcome our guest for today, Hector Hernandez.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much, Grace, for that I don't know if I can call it powerful introduction, but thank you very much. I am really very happy to be with Grace in this conversation about competency modeling, and hope that the end of this conversation, we get to know more about it and really appreciate what it can do, especially at this time of pandemic, where many opportunities can be attributed to developing a competency modeling or framework in your organizations.
It's really a very interesting topic, Hector. So how do you like to start it?
Well, maybe I will maybe presume that a lot of people, especially in the HR world, already know what competency framework is all about. And as we know, competency framework is a model for success for a particular job. That's the beauty of this competency modeling per se, because it is a corporate intervention or a corporate undertaking, but at the same time, it can focus from the macro to the micro to the specific job in the organization. I don't know of any other intervention in the world of OD, of HR, where it can focus from the macro at the same time with the micro. What I'm saying is, you're talking about the culture of the organization on the macro level. You're talking about the strategic directions of the organization on a macro level. But at the same time, it opens up to the requirements of the key jobs or the critical positions in your organization. And from here, I can probably work out with you, Grace, what are the 5 reasons to start your competency framework in your organization now, as maybe most of our HR people are have more time to talk about the so-called the quadrant 2 of Stephen Covey. Important but not urgent.
Yes.
But at the same time, you can really put a lot of contribution to the business. And the first reason to me, and also I think to most organizations, if they can only realize, is that it attracts and engages top talents into the organization. A lot of this, what we call talent engagement or talent retention strategies, are focusing more on the other side of it, like maybe providing more benefits or providing more incentives to attract and to engage. But you see, as we know, all of these are just motivations that will soon fade out.
Correct.
The more important part is, how are you going to really use those key and critical jobs to ensure that they are really engaged and that they are really important to the organization. Now, the basic concept of competency is critical jobs, critical positions. So we are not talking here of all the positions, but only certain positions that if, let's say, we close that position today, what will happen to the organization? So that's the what we call as the mission critical jobs to the organization. If I am going to do, for example, a succession planning strategy for an organization, I will only look for those mission critical jobs.
And that's where you would have to align, of course, with the different leaders and the people managers, right, of the organization, to really give you feedback on what are these mission critical jobs. And there's some sensitivity there, diba? Especially if employees would get to know about it, and then they see that, hey, my position is not tagged as critical, then that becomes another issue or challenge altogether. But let us go back to what you mentioned earlier, Hector, the 5 reasons. Because you read my mind, and while you were speaking at the start, I was saying, if I were to reach out to Hector, what would be my guiding points for me to start going into this competency building activity? And I think the 5 reasons would help any leader, any CEO out there, and any people manager or HR. So what would these 5 reasons be, Hector?
Well, actually, I've started already one, Grace, and the first one is it will attract and engage top talents into the organization. How does a competency model of a framework do this? Well, if if there is a surely competency model or framework that is implemented in an organization, it is, as we know, as we defined it earlier, it focuses on the top talents. And if it focuses on the top talents or the key talents, then you know that there can be a serious-minded intervention that will be applicable to these people. And we know for a fact that an organization, when they treat top talents, these are published in not necessarily published in newspapers, but people in the know get to understand that this is how, for example, this organization does it, and it becomes a way to attract other people to get into your organization. But it's only one advantage, because what really the point is to develop the people from the inside. One of the problems right now is uh, there are typical headhunters that are moving around the organization, and they provide you with the top talents. But these top talents, as they are external people to the organization, they cannot just develop the so-called loyalty and commitment, because they have a different kind of culture that they are getting into the organization. So the answer really is to develop your internal talent, because your internal talents are the ones that will focus their attention to uh, making the organization more profitable. And the only way, and the common sense to that, is the improvement of their competencies. And that is where it can attract and engage talents into the organization. I'm not talking about external talents. I'm talking of the internal talents, the bench strength of the organization. And of course, there's always big disadvantage of people coming from the inside, from the outside to the inside, because they get to have higher salaries, no? And then the people from the inside who have been loyal to the organization are just kept those kinds of salaries that they think they deserve more than those externals. So in fact, if you are going to get more talents from the outside, it creates a lot of animosities. And those animosities are not necessary for the organization, because what you want to happen is more collaboration, more engagement, and more profitability. So that's the first one, attracting and engaging top talents into the organization. So the next one reason is it will focus on the planned development of top talents, because attracting and engaging is one, but the real thing that will make the person stay in the organization is if there is a focused planned development of top talents, meaning the organization is really willing to spend money in these people. But the thing is, spending money is not necessarily sending them to Harvard or sending them to Michigan, but really more of the on-the-job activities that you can come up with. Like I know of in Novartis, we had this situation where, and I'm sure in your organizations also, Grace, you must have an experience of every Mancom or every Execom, there would always be one issue that comes out every time, every recurring issue, isn't it? And what happens in Novartis is, as soon as they have identified that recurring issue, they will outright create a task force that will study further that issue, and then they will ask within 90 days, give us the solution to that issue. And the creation of the task force is an important, very cheap, actually very efficient way of developing talents, at the same time expanding the horizon of the individuals.
Right, right, right. And I think you've touched a very good point of developing internal talents. And I think because of the span of HR experience that we both share, and also, of course, some of our viewers right now, some organizations have the intentionality, have the intent to bring in external talents, but there should be a good balance. Like they bring in one, two, or three, but still develop, a larger pool of top talents internally. And you're very correct in saying that it doesn't take an organization to send them, let's say, to prestigious business schools and whatnot. But on the job training has also been practices of organizations, or if the company has sites outside, let's say, let's talk of the Philippines, and they have sites in other countries, they would cross-post them in the different facilities of the organization, and that would take part of in the development of the individual, right? And it's putting structures, because tell me, Hector, about what you've seen when organizations talk about training and development, succession planning. What have you seen are the usual pitfalls which maybe competency building can address?
Well, one area, Grace, in the area of training and development is, remember we had been focusing on the so-called TNAs, or the training needs analysis, and which when I graduated from college and then joined as training assistant in Ayala Life, that was the first task that I was given. No? Come up with a TNA of this level of employees, and from the TNA, you tell us what to do next. But you see, uh, I've seen almost all TNA surveys as really a useless endeavors, because whom do you ask? No, usually the supervisors and the incumbents, and they will tell you, "Oh, I like to attend the basic supervision, or I like to attend the basic warehousing, or I like to attend this and this." And these are the wants of the incumbents. These are not the needs of the organization. And so, if the wants of the incumbents are the ones going to be pursued, then it's going to be nothing. It will be useless to the organization. It has
Correct.
got to be something which is needed by the organization. And that is where competency development is very, very important. Um, in competencies, you have this what you call competency leveling. So for example, if assuming that one of the core competencies that was identified was, for example, innovation. Okay, so and innovation as defined by the organization requires, for example, for this position as, let's say, marketing manager, a level 3. And a level 3 is defined as mastery. So that is the requirement of the organization for a marketing manager for innovation. Okay. And here comes the incumbent. So you assess the incumbent, and the assessment is a level 2 only for innovation. So right away, there's a gap of 1. So level 2 is just what they call in competency as just purely on the practical part of it, just can apply, okay? But the requirement is mastery, which is level 3. So right away, you see a gap, and the way to close the gap is to find out what are the interventions that can be applied so that this person occupying this marketing manager position at innovation, which is level 3, will reach the level 3. So that kind of closing the gap becomes very important to the organization and to the individual. And it really transcends to something much more than what the individual wants, but it's really more of what the organization wants and what the individual can contribute.
Correct. Totally agree. Totally agree, Hector. So, what other, I think you've touched on 3 reasons already, or 2?
2. Okay.
2. So, can you share with us the third?
Okay. The third one is it will enhance the corporate culture of the organization, where, for example, innovation, collaboration, and communication are the must competencies of the organizations now during the pandemic. There had been no other time when these 3 core competencies must be fully grasped by the individuals in the organization. I was talking about innovation. I'm talking about collaboration. I'm talking about communication. And in fact, the fourth one is building relationships, because these are the 4 competencies that will drive the way things are done differently. Unlike before, where we are on site. And remember, innovation, collaboration, communication were also requirements during the on-site situation. But now it is work from home. It has become more difficult for a supervisor to have innovation, even to collaborate and even to communicate.
Or build relationships virtually.
Yes, and also building relationships. So it is much, much more challenging now. And but of course, being challenging doesn't mean that we cannot overcome it. But because we have the competency model, that can help us along those lines. So that will be my third. My fourth is it builds employee awareness of the importance of competencies across the organization via, for example, job posting of vacancies. You might think it is a minute thing, but really building employee awareness of the importance of competencies across the organization is really a way of informing everyone that we are really serious about this matter of building competencies in the organization, across the organization. And maybe just probably via a job posting. Job posting is not just announcing the vacancy in a position all over the organization, but more of what are the competencies required for this position. So, if, for example, the job posted position is a vice president, and I am a supervisor. Okay, so if I am really going to think long term for this organization, and I begin to understand what are the competencies required for a vice president of HR, and the competencies are labeled as such, then I know now exactly what is my trajectory. I can now understand. Okay, I should be able to develop all of these competencies so that I'll be able to really align my objectives to the organization, becoming a vice president of HR. So to me, it's just a small thing like job posting, but in itself, it is really huge because you are really building a career. And building the career is the first and foremost is communicating. And without the communicating, then employees will just say, I don't know, I don't have any pag-asa in this organization. So that's my fourth. And then my last is, yes, okay.
Yeah, Hector, I think, the growing of talent internally has really been very successful in a lot of the global organizations or even local but huge companies.
Mhm.
And you can see that they take pride in their current vice president, and they would say, hey, we actually grew him from the ranks, right?
Exactly.
So it also takes pride from the organization itself, but it sends a very strong message to
Mhm.
the different employees that you can become our future vice president if you are
Exactly.
willing and if you are able and if you would invest your time, talent with us.
And just to add on that, Grace, is a very simple way of communicating those vacancies. The fact that you are posting those vacancies, a vice president in the organization, means it means a lot for you to get people from within first. And in fact, McKinsey is saying the formula for internal and external talents would be something like 70-30. So it's good to maintain your definitely your internal talent at 70%, but also it's good to get some 30% to come in because that will prevent what we call as complacency, uh,
Yes.
and then also new ideas coming into the organization. Because if it's 80, for example, if it's 90-10 or 100% internal talent, it's not also good for the organization because there will be no new ideas that will come in.
And
But
that's really true. That complacency, Hector, and also the building of culture. If you don't have external talent that provides you that third eye, a different point of view, a new perspective, you will get stuck to the culture that you have built. So you will just go over and over and over again with that particular way of doing things, with that way of life within the organization. And when that happens, to your point, a newcomer, when he would see that this is not the culture that I would like to be in, then you're not able to retain them, especially really, really good talent. I've seen it. I've seen it in I've experienced it myself. And I would say, Hector, that this is with the usual, traditional, family owned companies in the country.
uh, but one thing, Grace, about that the situation that you mentioned is it's very difficult to argue with success. For example, the top Filipino corporations now, who are mainly Filipino Chinese, they are very, very successful, isn't it? But really, the culture is very different. The last idea or the last reason to start your competency framework now in your organization is because the competency framework improves the people systems in the organization by way of, let's say, a new performance management system, a new reward system, a new retention strategy, or a new way to develop people that are competency based. Because once you put in those two words before, let's say, competency-based performance management, it changes the whole thing. It is no longer the old concepts of results and behaviors, but it now transcends to something more, which is competencies. And also, it connects to the reward system. So if it's competency-based reward system, then it focuses more on, let's say, rewarding competencies. So in the companies I've been with, maybe one or two would have a competency increase. So once the competencies are reached to a certain level as required, then there will be a competency increase in his or her salary, which is something new, isn't it? It's not being done by most companies.
Right, right. Hector, talking about competencies and with your very vast experience in competency building, what were the common competencies of leaders, of senior leaders,
Mhm.
that you have seen across industries? Like, even if you go from one industry, one company to the other, you've seen it that it is a common competency, let's say for people managers.
Mhm. Yeah.
What will these be?
You see, Grace, consultants are consultants, isn't it? So the longer the engagement is, the better for them, especially if they have a doctor or a lawyer son studying. No? So you know what I mean. So for example, in a competency framework, McKinsey to me is one of the best thinking processes in competencies because they simplify everything. For example, their competency model only talks about two areas. One is core competencies and the other one is functional competencies. Because according to McKinsey, by its very nature, it's very difficult to understand the concept. And if you're going to increase the number of competencies inside that model, it will be more complicated and more the least to be misunderstood. So, for example, some guys would say there are three, like, okay, the core competencies, functional competencies, and they add the leadership competencies, okay? But in McKinsey, leadership is part of the core.
Or yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because according to them, why do you have to elaborate more on the core? But you know, some people say because we want to know more about the leadership components. We'd like to divide further the leadership components. And then some other consultants will still add one more, which is the organizational competency. So we have the core, you have the technical, you have the leadership,
Leadership.
you have the organizational. And some others would say, okay, let's focus on people management. No, so what I'm saying now is now there are five, and the more of this, the more complicated. But
Right.
really, if you just focus on the McKinsey model, which is the core and the functional, then you cover it. In the core, you talk about leadership, and you're asking about what are the commonality of competencies that you can find in the organization. In the leadership alone, um, for example, American Express would divide or would categorize leadership into change leadership, into uh, uh, thought leadership, and then there's another. No, so because they fell in love with the word leadership. American Express fell in love with the word leadership, and so they wanted to expand it. Uh, they also got McKinsey, but they insisted on McKinsey. I want them the leadership competence to be much more focused. And well, you may not know, but American Express is still one of the biggest financial services in the world.
Correct.
Uh, the Philippines is not a market for American Express because we are not a tourist destination. Uh, But if you go to American Express head office in New York, it is one of the most lavish kind of environment you'll be in. And I was lucky because you know that American Express is so generous, especially in training and development. So they divide the world into two, domestic USA and the rest of the world, or they call it international. And I fall within the international. What happens is when they introduce or launch a new training program or anything, they will launch it first, let's say on a Monday, for domestic USA, and then the following day for international. So even before, when during the time when they're launching it, we were already there in New York City for waiting for our time, for them to start to train us. I was really lucky because they would always call us a flight to New York, first class. Can you imagine first
Oh,
class?
yes,
And
yes.
then our hotels are all first class accommodation. So it's really unbelievable. So the experience itself and the generosity of the organization. Yeah. So what I'm
It
saying
goes
is,
back. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
what I'm saying is, leadership per se is a very important aspect of any competency. Uh, but it really depends on what is the liking of the organization. If they want to expand it further, to make it more concrete, or maybe jibing with the corporate culture. But that's the beauty of competency.
Hector, I'll put on my HR hat
Okay.
and join me in putting on that HR hat, because I'm sure that we have a lot of HR professionals who are watching us right now, junior and senior. So, what would be a core competency for HR? And maybe I will look at that competency, build it so that I would become a successful HR leader in the future.
That's a very good question, Grace. I think I would still be very much focusing on the four core competencies of innovation. Uh, One, because that's the only way for you to make a distinction, especially when you are arguing during the MANCOM or during the OPCOM. You have to come up with something innovative uh, in the way you do things in HR. Because right now, HR has gained so much build up or expectation in the organization, especially in the Philippines. And as we know, there are some HR people in the Philippines now who are being paid seven figures a month. And that's really a very good way for HR to be in the Philippines. So you don't have to be in the US or in Singapore to be paid seven figures, and you can have those figures every month. So that's innovation. Second is, you just cannot stand alone. You have to collaborate. So that means you have to really your empathetic listening, your ears on the ground, should really be very sharp. In fact, I'm sure you and I will have the experience that when we recruit people, sometimes by just looking at the face, or just by the way the person walks, we already know that this person will be successful or not. Uh, but of course, those are exceptions.
Correct.
So, and then communication, it is a basic thing for us to communicate very well our ideas, our concepts, but be very realistic. So that's the most important point. And then you're building relationship. So relationship management is always most important for any HR. Kasi nakakahiya naman na you're the HR head, and wala kang relationship skill or competency in
Oh,
the organization.
right.
That's too embarrassing. No? So just to recap, it's innovation, becoming more collaborative with your co-peers and people below you, and of course also your boss, your communicating techniques, and also your building relationship management is very important to be
There's so
successful.
much there's so much talk right now, Hector, on HR, that we should have that business acumen.
Mhm.
The business acumen. So where will that fall? That would fall under functional.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Because I
And so,
remember,
go
I
ahead.
remember in my first international conference at Novartis, that was year 2000 when I joined Novartis. Um, so we always sent to Basel in Switzerland, and uh, the very first thing that the speaker was talking to us, because Novartis would is a Swiss company, it's a European company, but it's very American in the sense that whenever the top leaders congregate, they would always invite the American gurus, not
Mm,
the European gurus, but the American gurus, because they think that the American gurus are more innovative than the counterparts in Europe. And they are Europeans, remember. And so the very first thing that the speaker, I remember very clearly that the very first thing that the speaker was talking to us was about business acumen. Um, he was telling us that if you do not know your business, if you do not know how the business works, you cannot be an HR manager, or you cannot be sitting there on the table talking about the business of your organization. So that's very foremost business acumen. And he also told us that that has always been the pitfall of any HR manager, just thinking along his expertise at HR, but forgetting about the business. And that is definitely a big pitfall, and you will definitely be defeated in your role. So
right.
business acumen uh, is a functional competency. It's a very important one. You must understand how the business works.
Right. And that's what we do, I think, as head of HR, especially if we have a team, if we have a pool of, we refer to them for purposes of our discussion now, would be our HR business partners,
Mhm.
right? I remember we were called employee relations officers
Okay.
before, during my Intel days. And we were the guinea pigs. We were the first batch of ER officers, but aside from you knowing end to end HR functions, we were all exposed in the different businesses. So each of us were assigned to be the ER officer of testing, or ER officer of assembly, ER officer of the support function. And then now I have been seeing that in the different industries, in the financial services, BPO, where we really hire HR business partners and the business acumen that want, that want from the individual, from the HR professional to learn the business and just have the HR processes right at their fingertips, but to really want to learn the business. I think I have seen, and I'm sure you have seen a lot of HR professionals who have grown in the role, not only, and we have HR heads who are now heads of operations or who became CEO of different organizations. And I guess it started with them knowing the business that they were supporting.
And maybe in addition to what you just mentioned, Grace, is the importance of data analytics. No? So now the HR business partners must know how to interpret the data and how to analyze the data. So it is I think it's gone more than just knowing the business. It's also is understanding how the numbers speak. No?
Correct.
Uh, and data analytics is now part of the major role of a business partner in HR.
Totally agree. And that's where you can have a seat on the table because me, rule of thumb, I always tell the operations or the business to make sure that during their weekly or monthly meetings, that their HR business partner is with them. And that's where the HR business partner would have a value add, the presence that he's not just there as a wallflower, but really taking the lead, presenting all the data, the analytics that they have, that they have gathered. And that's where the operations guys, really, the operations leaders, they're more into also the numbers, they're more into analytics. They're more
Yes.
into how do you align the numbers that you're telling me now with how I can develop my employee, how I can retain my team, or if I have to let go, let go of any one of my team. So give me all of those, all those metrics or all those numbers.
And one of the more applicable version now is the workforce planning,
Yes,
which is
yes.
really a new thing that's happening where most HR business partners are focusing on. If you are talking to the operations head, the question always is, how do you determine the number of people that I will be needing at this point in time, especially in the healthcare business right now, where because of the pandemic, for example, in a previous company we worked with, which is the biggest HMO company in the Philippines, now they have to work out how to place the nurses, which hospitals would need, how many, when. So the workforce planning gets into the picture, and it is the business partner that makes all of those decision making.
Right. And aside from making the decisions, it's really where HR can make sound recommendations,
Exactly.
right? And, and it builds the trust and the confidence which each of us HR, those are very critical in our roles, that we are trusted, and that the employees and the leaders are confident in our competencies and in how we become the thought leaders for the organization.
And very much impacting the financial world of the business. No? So all of this would have impact in the financials. No? But one of the things also, Grace, that since you mentioned about the HR business partner, which is now the trend, is what are the competencies that you would need to develop, no, if you become an HR business partner? Because it seems to me that the competencies now are so highly regarded that you just cannot get a junior one to sit as HR business partner in any board meeting or any OPSCOM. It has got to be something with seniority, something that can talk, something that can communicate, something that can be somebody who can be assertive. Because some of the HR business partners that I've seen right now are, I don't know, maybe just starting up, and I thought it will be very difficult for a new HR to be an HR business partner. You must have at least 5 years of
Yeah.
work of have working knowledge of the business before you can really sit down on the table and argue with the bosses about workforce planning, etc. But it seems to me that now they're getting younger and younger and not much experience, and that can be the beginning of a problem.
Correct. And that goes back to the first reason which you've presented, right? And that, I mean, competency building is there. You implement it to attract talent, to engage them, or even to retain them, right? Attract, retain, and engage. And so that's where you start. That's where you start using competencies. Let's say for the HR business partner that you have mentioned, if the core competency and functional are clear for the HR head of the organization when looking and identifying HR business partners, then I think it's going to be very easy to bring in the real talent that you need to support the business,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, you're correct. I've seen very young HR business partners also, and I've seen it in the BPO industry, um, because the employee workforce also in the BPO are all millennials mostly. And so you also have to make that balance, that you hire an HR business partner where the employees are comfortable in building relationships, they're comfortable in communicating with the HR business partner. But again, that's not all that, right? Because there's work to be done. There, like as you've said, they have to know the business. They have to know analytics. They have to be able to speak up, in the meetings. You cannot have an HR business partner who would feel intimidated. And that's where I would say I don't think you will be successful if you get intimidated by the people, especially in operations, who are very, very assertive. So you have to be equally assertive, like the people in operations, for you to build that relationship with them.
And if you have the inexperience to boot, then you won't be able to argue with them. So it's really still the best thing there is to bring your experience. Because for example, now as the two of us are talking, most of the contents of what we're talking about are really based on experience, isn't it? So we cannot just talk like this in comfort with this particular topic if we have not done this. Because if we just read it on, reading on the books on competencies, there are many, but reading competencies will not really suffice to really give you that confidence to talk about what competencies can do to your organization.
That's true. That's true. And so, Hector, um, what would be your, if I were the viewer right now and I'll ask you the question, Hector, what would be my takeaway from our session today on competency modeling or competency building?
Well, one area that I can probably look at is your own individual development plan as an HR practitioner. Maybe you can be a junior or mid manager or even a vice president of HR, because it doesn't mean that if you're a vice president, you already know all. So maybe you want to be a senior VP for HR or an executive vice president for HR. You want to really get that seven figure in the future. So you must have an IDP, we call it, individual development plan. And that individual development plan spells two major areas. What are the gaps in terms of core competencies and also in terms of functional competencies? So once you have the gaps, then you can just identify those interventions that you can now make sure to close those gaps. For example, if I'm a junior HR manager, and I know that communication is an area, because I've spoken about 4 areas already, isn't it? They don't have to do research. They can just focus on these 4 areas: innovation, collaboration, communication, and relationship building. Maybe just do a self-assessment. How good am I in those 4 areas? Forget na lang the functional. Yung 4 na lang na core. And then just make a label: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is the lowest, 4 is the highest. And then, okay, where am I in terms of the 1, 2, 3, 4? And then you can have your own gap analysis and then close the gap. So in that way, you can have your starting up individual development plan. And that IDP will help you succeed in the future.
And talking about IDPs, I'm sure you have seen it in performance management systems that there is always a portion there that talks about when you do your self-assessment on your performance, right? So there's a portion there that would say, what would be my developmental needs? And so employees go through the pain, quote unquote, of really writing it down. But sometimes it gets stuck right there, and their manager or their line manager does not do anything about it. And I'm not talking only of HR, but in general, like I write down, or employees would write down their individual development plan, but their line manager would just look over it during the performance review and it stops there. And I think that is where we are calling on all the people managers, whether it's part of your system or not. But I think that you should look into building and growing your team members, building their competencies, modeling them, because at the end of the day, that's the legacy that you will leave behind. Like, I'm sure, let's take a few steps back, Hector, and let's look at our team members who used to report to us many years ago. And if you look at them, I'm sure we take pride in seeing that they're now HR heads in their own
Yes.
companies, right?
Yes.
But of course, it also shows you that, oh my gosh, it's been so long, like 30 years of HR experience would speak of our seniority, not only in our biological, chronological age, but in the profession itself. And
That's
you
right.
just take pride that you see them being leaders right now. And you can say, hey, I was instrumental in modeling and in building the competency of the HR head of this and that company, isn't it?
Of course, of course. Maybe you can just go back to your performance management issue earlier and then the IDP. I really would suggest that if you have your own IDP, just focus on one or two areas. Don't focus on many. And then one area, for example, you're talking about innovation, just focus on one or two intervention. So don't make so many expectations to deliver during the year, because there are only 52 weeks in a year and there's so many things to be done. And so be more realistic. Just one or two intervention will do, just
Correct.
to close that one gap. And then get the assurance from your supervisor to get resources from him. Because you cannot succeed. You may have the best IDP, but if you're the only one who wrote it and nobody supported you, without the supervisor's support or your manager, it will not fly. So you have your own IDP, make it very short, one or two, and talk to your supervisor and then get the support. And that will definitely be something.
So, Hector, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm sure that our viewers have learned a lot. It is truly a learning experience, not only for our viewers, but also for myself. So, any parting words, Hector?
Well, thank you very much, Grace, also for giving us this opportunity. I really want to reiterate the importance of competency modeling in your organizations at the moment. And we have spoken about the 5 reasons to start your competency framework. And be very sure that if you go into this, it will really spell out the success of your organization. So don't be worried. It's not really difficult. It's easy. Maybe it's just a matter of talking to the right people, like Grace and myself. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Hector. It was truly a pleasure having you with us at the Leader's Edge. And therefore, friends, for our next episode on May 26th, we will have another seasoned HR professional. In fact, he's the past president of the People Management Association of the Philippines, none other than Ernie Espinosa. And his topic will be on coaching and mentoring. Please join us again. And remember, learning is a never-ending journey with limitless vistas. Good night, everyone.